I was thinking about the that poem that became sort of a meme around 2015 during the Syrian war and other conflicts that had created millions, that displaced millions of people, and it was that you don't flee your home unless your home is the mouth of a shark.
Welcome to another episode of the Filmosophers Movie Talk Show. I'm Chris Bush.
And I'm Dean Slider.
And on the Filmosophers, we talk about film and filmosophy with the people who make and love the movies. And we're really happy to have on our show today writer-director Wyatt Rockefeller, whose new film, Settlers, is just out, I think, last week. Yeah? Is that correct, Wyatt?
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, really happy to have you on. We certainly want to talk about Settlers, want to talk about some of your favorite films, but also really be interested in talking about your philanthropic and social activist work in environmental issues, and I think that'd be really interesting to our audience too. We'd love to have you share with us about that as well. So,
sure, yeah, happy to talk about anything you want.
Had a chance to watch Settlers and really enjoyed it. And I know this isn't your first time. This is your first, is it correct? This is your first major writing, directing effort?
First feature, yeah. Yeah.
First feature film. Yeah. I just wanted to say I thought you did a really, really admirable job. It's not an easy thing to do. And just all the elements. And I think, well, why don't you share a little bit, just the setup, and then we can comment a little bit.
Sure. It's about a young girl and her parents living on the remote outskirts of Mars as it may be one day when we have at least partially terraformed it. So made it to, or in the process of making it habitable, like on Earth. Anyway, they, as we learn, are effectively refugees from Earth and are clinging to this homestead where they're eking out a basic existence. And all seems okay until strangers appear in the hills and things go south from there. And I'll leave it at that.
You assembled really quite, I thought, a really extraordinary cast. How did you land such wonderful talent, including Brooklyn Prince, who plays Little Remy, who first broke on the scene, as far as I knew, from Florida Project and just like blew everyone away, I think. Sophia Boutella, who I think had a breakout part in Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron, and then in The Mummy with Tom Cruise. Johnny Lee Miller, who's done a lot of work, and Ismael Cruz Cordova, whose work I was not familiar with, but I thought he was tremendous. Talk a little bit about how you assembled the cast and
yeah, it started with Brooklyn. We when it was just my wife and I. My wife is one of the producers on this, and we had the script, and I felt like it was in a place where I was ready to send it out, and we sent it to everyone and their mother, and contacts I had from film school or from shorts that I had made, and anyone else, and got a call out of the blue from an agent who had actually read it and said, I really like this. Who do you have in mind for this? And we, at that point, were saying, wouldn't it be great to find someone like Brooklyn Prince? But they actually repped her, and this was UTA, and so they sent her the script, and she and her parents really liked it and attached right away, and that's really what made this real. That led to other actors attaching and financing coming, and yeah, that was really the turning point. And I think, being a first-time director, I was the hurdle. I think we were able to punch above our weight with the cast because each role is meaty, and I did that deliberately. I sat down to write something that is basically one location, just a few actors, but it gives each of them an opportunity to really flex their muscles a bit, and then each of them, before taking that risk with me, I think really just wanted to understand how I imagined the world and their character's role within it, and just to make sure that they would have I would have the confidence in the vision that allow them to have the confidence in their performances and the choices that they would make when they arrived on set.
Well, Wyatt, how old was Brooklyn when you were shooting?
9.
She's incredible.
Yeah, right. She really is. She really is. And I mean, I think she was 6 when she shot the Florida project, which is just nuts.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I can't say enough good things about her and her parents, by the way. I mean, they're just really awesome people and very grounded, and they've kept her grounded despite all this attention, and also are very much a part of her creative process. So her dad was with her on set. Her mom was, via Skype helping her with her lines for the next day. Her mom's an acting coach, and so as a team we worked together. It was very helpful that her dad on set, really could get her into those, into the mindset of where she needed to go to bring out, like some of those more harrowing, to live in those more harrowing moments, which was nice to be able to have some, a father, her father on set to do that. And there was definitely a few moments where I'm just like, oh my God, I just keep making this 9-year-old girl cry. Like, what am I doing? And yeah, it's a sad film.
Yeah, but she has that quality that I don't think you can learn. I mean, where she just draws you in. You just feel inside her thoughts, inside her feelings, and you just want to keep watching her.
Yeah, I agree. She's magnetic, and also, even when we do a take for some of those more harrowing sequences, and no one would say anything to each other for an hour afterwards, just because she floored us all. It was just really affecting. And we would just go about our jobs setting up the next scene in silence. Yeah.
And isn't it something that I get the impression of what you said, that it was a 9-year-old signing on that gave the thing momentum to really move ahead.
Yeah, I mean, she's someone people want to work with, and I mean, yeah, she was just so amazingly good in the Florida project, and now subsequently in other things as well, Home Before Dark, etc. But that really, like, you see that movie and you're just like, who is this? This is just, you're right. You can't teach that. There's no way you can teach that.
Yep.
I'd be interested to know, given that this was your first feature film outing, how do you deal with the pressures psychologically, mentally, with all the challenges which must come from mounting the thing, getting it done, actually getting it made, and then subsequently, once it's made, dealing with all the critical and commercial repercussions, positive, negative, in between. Talk a little bit about that. You seem pretty together, and
thanks. I'm glad. I worked really hard on that, but I mean, actually, the answer is, in my case, I think is pretty simple. I'm very lucky that I get to do this with my wife. Again, she's one of the producers. Her name's Julie Fabrizio. She's been with me on this from the beginning, before anyone else, and actually, so the film just came out in the US on Friday, and I just, in the last few days, turned to her and said, I'm just so glad that we're doing this together, that we've got each other, because this would be a lonely, I mean, it is a lonely process anyway, but it would be a much more lonely process. And I remember too, when we were shooting, there were definitely moments where, on set, I just be like, what am I doing? I sat down to write something that I could feasibly direct at this point in my career, to make that leap to features. And again, it's one location, just a few actors. And then I had to go and set it on Mars. and there was so much insecurity. I had so much insecurity about, like, will anyone buy this? Just accept the world before they even get into the story. It's just such a high bar right out of the gate. And and I think it, in some ways, it did affect choice in the film. Like I think I shot it a little bit deeper than I would have. I shot with longer lenses, just so there was more of like a focus fall off, so you wouldn't see the backgrounds as well, even though like the sets are amazing. And fortunately, no one's complaining about the sets. But they're made of wood, and I knew that, and I was just very cognizant of that while we were shooting.
Oh, you fooled me.
Yeah, well, good. But like at night, that's I would sort of pour all my insecurities out onto Julie when we were back in our little hotel room in bed with our 3-month-old son, who was sleeping in the same room with us. He started at 3 months. And
now you were shooting in South Africa?
Yeah.
And how did that come about?
Well, we looked in a number of different places. South Africa, quite simply, has very good tax credits. It has a very good crew base. One of our other producers, Josh Horsfield, who's based in the UK as we are, but he had shot a few films there already, and we plugged in with Johan Kruger, who is a South African producer, and was really able to plug into a whole network that he had. And so that was in some ways an easy decision, but we still had to find a place to actually shoot it, and that really looked otherworldly. And we're actually having a pretty hard time doing it until we were actually leaving Vuelsdrift, the area that we shot in. And as we were driving, I said, "What's up that road there over that hill?" And we turned off onto it and came over the hill, and there was just this playground for a film crew, and it was totally lunar, but also red. Like the rocks were this very unique red color, which was unlike anywhere else in the landscape. And we kept driving and came to this, what we called a bald patch, which was at one point a lake that had dried up, and the ground had become desiccated. And that's where we built the homestead eventually. And the sets, it was a bigger area than we thought, but that actually worked to our advantage, because we set the buildings apart based on how long it would take a girl of 9 years old to run to the house before being intercepted by an adult running, trying to intercept her along the way. So we had crew do races to set out the pace.
So you didn't have to use filters or anything to enhance the red color of the soil and the rocks?
No, I mean, we shot with the Sony Venice, which has a very natural kind of base to it. It sort of captures. I think it's, according to Billy Nell, the DP, who had shot with it before and had really advocated for it, said that, it really is as close as you can come to kind of just like what you see with the natural eye as sort of a starting point. But we did quite a bit in post-production with the color grading, and that's really where we really had to take it on faith throughout production and through the edit that the world would show up when we brought the color and the sound and the VFX in it. And with the color specifically, at the moment you take the blue out of the skies, you leave Earth. And when you put, you add this brown touches in, then you get to Mars or somewhere similar.
Right. The cinematography is beautiful.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, Billy did an incredible job, and we were very much in sync. We basically were attached to the hip during pre-production and really just worked through every scene. We'd mapped everything out and shot listed and storyboarded for the more complex sequences, just really so that when we got to set, we actually didn't even have to look at it, or we just, if things had to change, we could pivot on a dime because we knew what the scene was about. We both did. And were able to speak in that shorthand. But I can't say enough good things about Billy. He really thinks in images, and he is a storyteller in his own right.
Yeah, and the way that I mean, the landscapes and the sets, but the way that the people are shot. And I wanted to ask you, the hat that Brooklyn wears through most of her part of the film was so interesting because it didn't look like a hat that I'd seen, and in some sort of subtle way made me feel, well, A, okay, we're in somewhere different here, and B, she's got this interesting, spunky personality, and C, there was something Dutch looking about it. And between that and some of the Villies close-ups of her, I kept thinking Vermeer. I'm looking at a Vermeer.
Hey, great! Wow. I'll take it. Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad to hear you say that about the hat. The hat was kind of a stretch a bit. You know, we questioned it, and there was definitely a moment where, because I wanted a hat like that, and I agree. I think we were really trying to walk that line between something that feels more futuristic and kind of dystopian kind of future, and something that harkens back to more traditional things, I suppose, like Dutch. I mean, I've always thought of this as a Western, and so I was thinking about that as well. But there was definitely a moment where I'm like, what were we thinking with that hat? Like, but I've since come around on that, and I love it. So I'm glad I didn't cut it.
Yeah. No, keep the hat.
Keep the hat.
You know, the setting was Mars and Alien, but it's a very human drama. And I just wanted to comment that, you know, showing how people react under very extreme physical and psychological conditions, and having it feel very authentic, not an easy thing to do. I thought you did a really marvelous job there, because, you know, I'm very alert to, you know, if a line or line reading or situation feels false, you know, the alarms go off right away. Yeah. You take me out of the thing. And I just, I thought you just really did a fine job on keeping that. And even though it takes very unexpected, in some case traumatic turns, it felt very real, and I appreciated that about it as well.
Well, thanks. That really means a lot. I mean, for me, that is why I pursued this story. What I thought had real value in this, why I thought this was worth an hour and a half of people's time and a couple of years of mine, more than a couple. And so I do appreciate that. For me, the whole backstory, you know, the whole world, all of that would change on a dime, just as I was coming up with it, to really fit with whatever, you know, the dynamics were with the characters. That's what I focused on, and that's what I think, you know, as I think with film, it's an opportunity, you know, at its best, it's an opportunity to put yourself in other people's shoes and see the world through other people's eyes. And I feel like the process of writing this and shooting it really was that opportunity for me. You know, for instance, writing through the eyes of female protagonists as a man was a real interesting challenge, and actually got feedback from female friends and my wife, who, when they were reading the script, saying, you got to make Jerry more, you got to make him more likable. You're letting Remy off the hook too easily. And you know, and they cited their own experiences. One friend put it, she's like, I feel like I've been in this situation before. Like, you know, it's like, oh, I thought this was a business meeting, and suddenly it turns into something else. And that was, you know, I'd written this scene and I had never even thought of it like that, you know, sort of a real world analog. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of is, so actually, you guys, maybe I shouldn't tell this because it would probably give a lot away. So, but anyway, I'll say this in a very oblique way, unless you give me the green. Sorry, losing my voice.
We're pretty much a spoiler-free zone on the show.
Spoiler-free zone. Okay, well, I'll just say very obliquely that I actually ended up changing the script in a key scene, sort of the pivotal climactic scene. Changed the script based on Nell's experience shooting a previous scene, and I put it to her, what would you do? And she thought about her experience in a previous scene shooting that scene, and said, and she made a choice based on that. And we shot that, and I just felt like, okay, we're getting close to a real lived experience here, trying to actually follow the lived experiences of these characters, as opposed to just, following a plot. And that felt like, okay, this was worth something. This is valuable.
And Nell is the actress who plays grown-up Remy, the part played by Brooklyn
That's right.
Prince. So it does span a number of years. And
Yeah.
just to clarify for the audience, fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
So, you birthed the baby, and you love your baby and wouldn't want to change a thing. Are you really happy with the result and what you gave life to?
Yeah, no, I had enough time with this during the so we had just locked picture when COVID descended on the West, and so we had this extended post-production, so everything after the edit, and that frankly worked to the advantage of the film. I think it really gave us the opportunity to really tweak things, and so I think this is certainly the best film I could have made, and I think that's important to accept as a film. And you put it out there, and people like it, others don't, but I very much stand by what I did, because I just honestly don't know what I would have done differently.
One thing I found so interesting about the film is my love affair with movies started, and I know this dates me, but this started with Forbidden Planet. Okay, so that was the mid 50s, B science fiction vision of Mars, with Robbie the robot and the giant id monster, the invisible id monster making his footprints in the sand and so forth. And it's just so interesting to take this one, metaphor that Mars is in our life, that here's this next world to go to, and see how our way of thinking about it and our way of feeling about it has changed. And by the time we get to Settlers, it's become such a human vision. I mean, this could have been for the most part, the film could have been set as in the Old West. They could have been pioneers in the Old West, and rather than relying on special effects and I mean, you've got one robot that's basically a box, a box with legs, but aside from that, it's really about people and the film. And I think this takes a certain amount of courage from a filmmaker, especially a first-time feature director like yourself, to have so much of it be in silence and so much of it be interior, and people brooding and digesting information and digesting feelings and not talking it all out. And I mean, you need terrific actors to make that work, of course.
You do, and yeah, we're very lucky. I mean, really leaned on the actors that we had to be able to convey that, interiority, and yeah, I mean, it's, again, this is the film I set out to make was really about human connections, that people really needing that human connection. Even Jerry does some pretty awful things, but he's doing them because he's after that same connection. And I think, for me, this is a coming of age story. It's about a girl really achieving her independence, and so it's a small story. And we had to, I agonized over the how much information about the world and the backstory to actually communicate to the audience, and how much to leave unsaid. I have the whole backstory, right? Everything on set, everything you see in the frame needed to have its own backstory, because they're so far out. I mean, I guess that's always true, but they're so far out there. They're that everything needed to make that trip has have to have a reason for making that trip. And I think having that in mind when you're making a film, having that detail is very important, because it gives flesh and texture to what you see. But then deciding, okay, what is actually important for people to understand in order to be able to appreciate what these people are going through. My goal with this was I want people to walk out of the theater and ask themselves, what would I have done in this situation? And that for me is where the value is.
I think the really beautiful example of that is early in the film when the little girl asks her father, did you see elephants? Did you see, what's the other one? He said, no. Did you see
a whale?
A whale? No. What did you see? I saw dogs. And right there, instead of, okay, we ecologically screwed up Earth, or we had a massive species die off. You didn't have to say that. That you just presented that in this kind of almost haiku like telegraphic way, and it was lovely.
Well, thanks. I do appreciate it. I think that partly is, it's an example of when you have a relatively modest budget, always searching for other ways to convey, the epic sweep of history. But also early on, I was thinking, okay, why did they have to flee Earth? What was it that chased them away? I was thinking about that poem that became sort of a meme around 2015 during the Syrian war and other conflicts that had created millions, that displaced millions of people, and it was that you don't flee your home unless your home is the mouth of a shark. And so I was thinking, do I have to come up with a zombie apocalypse or a pandemic, and realize no, I can actually we can just extrapolate out from the path we are on if we don't course correct, and people will fill that in. That is enough for people to understand, and actually in some ways makes this just that much more grounded.
Yeah, you hope. I mean, it's where you have to also give the audience you have to have some faith in the audience there.
Yes, yeah, no, but I mean, it's been nice to see that people definitely understand it. Like they're getting. I mean, and that was always a concern. What will people understand? Are they getting enough to understand what's going on? And I think there's definitely some fans, sci-fi fans and others who really want more world building and exploring what terraforming Mars is going to be like, and what's beyond their farm, which I would love to explore. If enough people see this and we get to make a sequel, I do have the contours of two more sequels, which we'll probably never get to do, but for this one, it was really just about focusing in on people being forced to consider these impossible, these things that they would never consider in a million years, and really look at themselves in the mirror and consider, how far am I willing to go? What am I really willing to do or not do to survive and to protect those I love?
Right.
Did you show a first cut to friends or folks, or even random audiences to kind of get feedback or test your premise of to make sure that the audience would go where you wanted them to go?
Yeah, we did. We did a few relatively small test screenings, but we did. They were people who had no context for the film, and that was really helpful. It was during an early cut of the film, and just helped us to really understand how people were reading things. And we did make a few adjustments. I mean, in fact, I think we kind of simplified things more, that we actually, I think, maybe even took out some more things that would potentially provide more context, because they were actually in some ways distracting to really appreciating what's going on in the moment.
I asked earlier a question, but I wanted to hone in a little bit, because it's something I'm really curious about. I think to myself, if I were in your shoes, just putting all your heart and soul into this thing, and so much passion and care and effort. And then it's out there, and then, you know, I asked myself, would I read all the reviews, all the movie critic reviews? Would I even do that? Would I put myself in that position? Because it's so, like, these people with a stroke of a pen, they could just, like, they can elevate you or destroy you. And how did you handle that whole psychological issue?
So, I mean, definitely the first couple to come out definitely land harder on on you, I'd say. Just, well, this is my first time doing this, so you know, there were moments of real relief, like when Guy Lodge wrote the sort of first real review for the film in Variety, and it was really positive, and which was just such a relief, and also such a thrill, you know, like just like that someone like that would, you know, would see something in your film and that you've worked so hard on. Like that was huge. And like when Anthony Lane featured it, you know, you know, in the New Yorker, and I mean, Anthony Lane is like he's like one of my favorite writers, let alone critics. You know, like I have quotes of his saved, you know, in my phone, just from things he's written that I thought sounded nice. And so that was a moment.
And he can be tough.
And he can be tough, yeah. No, and you know, both of them had criticisms of it, actually similar criticisms, and fair, you know, they're fair. It's, you know, you do, I think, have to make peace with your film, and I think that does inoculate you a bit. I mean, I'm definitely not like, yeah, I much prefer getting good reviews than bad, and I'd say this is split the critics. You know, some people really liked the choice, and it's really about the same thing. Like some people have really liked that we really like focused in on the characters and like kept it much more about this sort of human story, and others who wanted more, you know, more backstory and more context, and that's fair. You know, but that's the movie we set out to make, and I think I am very proud of this film, and again, like I just don't, even though I can accept the, you know, the criticisms, I just don't know how I would have made it any better in my mind, and so I don't know what I would have done differently, and that I think helps. And also, actually, a friend who is a much more experienced filmmaker who's been in, you know, and been in this a long time, wrote me a very nice note. And he said, he said, you know, next, there was a Broadway producer who would always call up his colleagues the day after a show came out and say next, and just whether the reviews are good or bad, you know, it keeps you more honest when they're good, and you know, gets you through when they're bad, and just keep focusing on what comes next. And I think that's very good advice and something I'm trying to follow.
Good. As you were making it, was there any attention to the kind of the thought that want it to be original? I don't want it to remind people of anything. I don't want them to say, oh, it's The Martian only with more people, or it's like Shane, only Shane is an ambiguous, you know, uncertain kind of character. Was there any of that going on as you made it?
So one thing we realized early on, and this was back when we were scouting locations, is that while we do want to chart our own course, and we want this to look different than anything you've seen before, we also need to be in dialogue with the popular vocabulary of both what Mars looks like and also what sci-fi looks like and what the future looks like. And so we were absolutely aware of, you know, Star Wars on down, of, you know, everything else, as well as Westerns like Shane, and certainly, I mean, certainly like the earlier like Ford kind of style was definitely influential, but also then like Peckinpah and Sergio Leone, like those were definitely big influences on me. Those are some of my favorite films, and I mean, I see this as a Western first and foremost because it's about people living on the lawless fringes, you know, trying to survive on the lawless fringes. Also, it's an immigrant story, and I think Westerns are inherently immigrant stories. They're about people trying to build a life in a new and often hostile place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it did. It felt familiar but not derivative, which is kind of the right kind of the sweet spot, I guess. Um, what are some of the film influences? We're always interested in speaking with our guests about some of their favorite films, and you had listed a few for us, and some of the films maybe that kind of helped inform your your execution of the film Settlers.
So, I mean, so I mentioned the westerns, but I actually a few other films that were specifically influential to me. Well, there was a few for different reasons. So I'll say, there is a element to this film where basically there's these sexual power dynamics going on. It's men taking advantage of their position and power over women and children, and how those women and children fight back. And so films like Fanny and Alexander, The White Ribbon, Ex Machina were really influential to me. With Fanny and Alexander, which is on my list that I sent you guys. The reason I included it on the list, I mean, beyond I love the movie, but the villain in that, the stepfather, it's about, for the listeners who haven't seen it, these two kids, their dad dies and their mom remarries this, and they come from this wonderful, loving family of actors, and then move in with their stepfather, who is this really austere minister in this like abbey, and he's awful. I just hated him so much when I saw this film, and I think the reason is because while he's effectively torturing these kids, he fully believes that he's doing this for their own good, and the hypocrisy of that is just maddening. And I honestly think that's when we hate someone on film. We can be all for people doing the worst kinds of things as long as they're honest with themselves about it, and they recognize it. But the moment someone's a hypocrite, I think that's when we turn on them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can move on, or I just realized there's other films on there that I could talk about for other that were influential.
Sure.
However you want to do it.
Whatever excites you. As
Well,
Dean said.
Actually, another one that is directly related to Settlers is Alien, which may seem like an obvious choice given the genre, and that it looms so large over the genre, but very specifically rewatching Alien while I guess we were probably in development or pre-production, what I was just so struck by is how little you actually see of the world that they inhabit, or worlds. It's like lines of text that come in, right, and then they go to this planet, and but it's all seen through screens, the screens that they're looking at. And so you're just seeing, you're seeing like the edges of a ship through mist, and then everything's very dark, but as a result, your imagination, the audience's imagination, fills the gaps, these vast gaps of this whole universe. And that I think it's so incredibly well done for many reasons, but that specifically. And for me, I think the most vivid images on film are the ones that actually aren't on film, the ones that are just off screen or suggested because they're in your head. I think probably the sexiest scene ever, and I'm definitely not the only one who thinks that, is the scene from Persona where the nurse just recalls a past sexual encounter to her patient. And it's basic. We never cut to the beach that she's describing. We're just on this long close-up of her, and we occasionally cut to the other woman listening to her on the bed. But we are on that beach. we are seeing the whole scene play out. And you can Google it if you haven't seen it. I mean, it's just on YouTube. And it's just this incredibly sexy scene because you're there, you're in it. And Bergman was so correct not to actually shoot it, because it's just going to be so much more vivid in your head your imagination than it would have been when they shot it.
Yeah, that of course goes back to the Greek drama, where, you know, when someone committed suicide or some huge dramatic thing happened, it was never shown. It was always described in a soliloquy, and it would have been considered just distasteful, just coarse to actually show that. And so it became this art form of conveying it indirectly.
Well, yeah, and I think that's interesting to hear it put like that. I didn't actually even know that it was actually considered distasteful. You know, I immediately think of like Macbeth or something, where, you know, the big battle scenes that take place are all
Mm-hmm.
they're all off stage, because how are you going to stage a big battle scene? But so I always thought it was more out of convenience as opposed to taste. But that's really interesting to hear. In Settlers, I actually, you know, and this wasn't so much like a budget thing, or like a question of taste, but, you know, most of the violence that occurs in this movie, and it is a somewhat violent movie, occurs off screen.
Right.
And that was a choice really based on the idea that it's not so much the act itself, it's the reality of the implications of that act. Like it's just knowing that what has occurred is what is actually terrifying.
You know, possibly my favorite shot in this whole film, and I'll phrase this carefully, I don't want to give too much away, but two people are in the house, and we know that they're struggling, and that only one of them is going to come out. And we see the girl standing several yards away, watching and waiting, and we just see her from the back. And you hold that shot for a long time, and it's incredible. It's, you know, it actually there's a shot in Pritzi's Honor. It's the moment where Jack Nicholson has to decide that he's gonna kill Angelica Houston, kill his lover / competitor in the biz.
Yeah.
And that moment is shown, his back is to the camera. And I remember some critic at the time writing, Jack Nicholson can do more acting with his back than most actors can with their front. And again, I think it's such a gutsy move as a director to just have her standing stock still, not gesticulating, not just waiting. It was an incredible film moment.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that up, and because that's something I had in my head from the beginning, and something I had to fight for, you know, and to keep it as long as it was. But I do think I really appreciate that, because that is a shot that means a lot to me, and, you know, I think the way I was able to defend it, you know, and keep it as long as it was, is because, you know, with the sound, it is broken up a bit, that you hear a little bit of what's going on in the house, just a little bit, hints, and then, you know, when the faucet runs from inside the house, that's a key. That was sort of the key moment for me, when the first indication of what's gone on, which then I try to echo again later in the movie, when a similar thing goes down, the faucet is running.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't talked about sound design, but, you know, it was very effective. The music was very effective.
Yeah, I thought the music was really good. And I'll tell you, I'm real sensitive to musical scoring in a film. By the way, I have to say, we're not always so complimentary of our guests' work on the show. So. No, really, you know, yeah,
I thought we're not pushovers.
Well, I really do appreciate it, and this is fun. I mean, you're the first person to mention that of any interviews I've done to mention that shot, and I'm just over the moon, because that is okay. Maybe my favorite shot. So.
Okay, well, don't get too used to it. Let's think of
something. Yeah, that's fine. We can go into the negative.
We can take you down.
But I do appreciate that you like the music as well. I mean, Nitin Sawhney was also such a get for us. I mean, he's just this remarkable musician, and that was so fun to be able to work with him, because he can, like, I think my first day with him, and this was before we shot, but went to visit his studio and described a little bit what I was imagining and played maybe 5 seconds of a reference. And he was like, okay, I think we're kind of on the same page here. Let me try something. And in 3 minutes, he had created a minute of score, which was amazing. And it was just like, oh my God, if this is our starting point, but that he can just work so quickly that we really could iterate and get to a place that we felt was right for the film, which was, something that was both, that had, that was in dialogue again with these, sort of sci-fi, what we think of as sci-fi, but was also grounded with real world instruments that he was, playing himself. And that I think helped to bridge that gap and make it feel more grounded.
It must be easy to get it wrong though, because there are so many films that get it wrong.
It is easy to get it wrong.
Where the score is either it just doesn't fit or it takes you out of the moment. I don't get it, but this fit really well. I thought, yeah, really good. So,
well, I'm glad to hear
talk about some other films, favorite performances, movie influences, directors.
Well, sure. So, just looking back at the list I had sent you guys, the first one I'd put on there was Afterlife by Hirokazu Koreeda, who is one of my favorite directors. I mean, it was great to see him win the Palme d'Or for Shoplifters, but like Father Like Son and Still Walking and After the Storm. I mean, I think he is an absolute master, and it really is because I think it's in Still Walking. There's this table scene where they're just around a table, which is hard to do. It's hard to do a table scene well, and he basically stays in a master shot and then and holds in it for most of the scene, and then something is said that lands on a character in a certain way, and he cuts to them, and that seems so simple, right? Like what could be simpler? But he does it in such an effort, just in such a seamless way, and it is so simple. And I really do think like those the masters, you're watching a master when you can't see the seams, they say. And the fact that he can hold your attention when seemingly nothing is happening, these are just these very domestic settings. But I just think you can't get better than him. And Afterlife was, an early film for him. I saw it when I think it was in 2000. I saw it a few years later when I was, in college, and just remember being it was just so thought provoking. It's about these folks that come to this place and they are interviewed and you start to realize that, they've all just died, and they're given a week. They get to watch their lives on videotape, the stack of videotapes. And at the end of the week, they have to choose a moment from their life to live in forever. And then this film crew comes and recreates that moment on a budget, and they film it, and they live in that moment forever. And it's a much more kind of fantastical concept than his later work, which is, I think, it's been a lot of times I've seen the movie, but I imagine his later work is more mature. But like, that movie stuck with me so much. Just wondering, like, what moment would I pick? And I just remember thinking it was such a beautiful film. So I did want to highlight that one.
And that's Afterlife by Hirokazu Koreeda. Wyatt's recommendation. Good.
And then this is probably more well known, but have you guys seen Amour by Michael Haneke? It won Cannes in, I think, 2012.
Yes.
That for me is another just like masterclass in filmmaking, and I think in some ways for similar reasons, where it's reached a point in his career where he's so confident in what the audience will get emotionally that he's just stripped away all sentiment. And so in the trailer, there's the scene where the husband is sitting in the chair and he's watching his wife, who in the movie has a stroke, and the movie's about him taking care of her as she deteriorates. And but there's a scene in the trailer where he's sitting in his chair and he's watching his wife playing piano, and we see a shot on him just sitting in his chair, single, and then we see his perspective of her playing the piano, right? And then we cut back to him, and then at some point he turns around and he stops the stereo, and we realize, oh, it was just a memory. That she's not actually there. She's in the other room in bed. And he sits back down, and then he looks back up at the empty chair. We don't see it, but we just see him look up in the trailer. And I just remember thinking, wow, what a look. And in the movie, he cuts before he looks back up. And I was like, why would you do that? Why would you cut that out? That's such an amazing moment. And I've thought about it for days, and I finally concluded, I'm like, I guess he's just that disciplined that he's like, even that would be indulgent. That extra look, like, we get it, move on, just the facts. And he trusts people to fill in those emotional gaps. And that is hard. I mean, as a director, you're just always worried about, are people going to get this? And you're under so much pressure to try to hold their hand and, add those, the music cues or whatever that's gonna tell them exactly how they should be feeling. And I think there are only a few directors that really have reached that point. I think like the Coen brothers can do that. Like they know, they've been at it long enough, like they know what people are going to get and not get, and can really strip it back to the bare bones.
We will wrap up in just a few minutes, but Wyatt, would love to hear a little bit too about your background in non-film related work. You've done a lot of work in energy policy, environmental work, philanthropic work. Interested to know a little bit about your interest in that field and what you've done.
Sure. So, well, I was raised by environmentalists, and so that's part of it. My dad is an environmental lawyer. My mom has worked in public advocacy for a long time around like.
Now, I should say you have a name that's the genesis of which is not known for environmental well-being. But that was generations ago. What I'm just curious to know, was John D a great grandfather, or what's the lineage there?
John D Sr. was my great grandfather, and I will say, while yes, he made his fortune from oil, which we're now actively trying to move beyond as a world, right? That starting with him and in every generation since, there really has one if not the philanthropic focus has really been the environment and conservation, and so that is a legacy that I am particularly proud of, and that certainly informed my own decisions, in my early career to work for President Obama as well. His first his presidential campaign, and then work in his administration at the Environmental Protection Agency, and then go on to work for a energy startup in East Africa, and those experiences were very formative. And I think the good thing about film too is that everything is related. Every experience is related to it. That you can take with you. And it was actually in East Africa while working for something. I mean, I was also in my early 20s feeling like, oh, I got to be doing something important with my life, and that film is frivolous, and I even though that's what I've wanted to do since I was 11 years old, I've got to be doing something else, and it was there while I realized that I was actually able to reconcile the two, that the people that I was working with and was interacting with, the people who were really making the most difference were the ones who had really found their niche. And I do think film also has the capacity to cross borders, as I talked about earlier, and put, see the world through other people's eyes. But I realized while I was there doing this work that I thought was very important, and it was important, but that I couldn't sleep at night until I wrote down the scene that was in my head. I was thinking about the stories I want to tell, and realized like whatever impact I have is going to be maximized through this, because I'm just going to work that much harder at it. And that's when I decided to go apply to school and to film school, for grad school, and came back to film as a result. But I mean, I have still in a parallel track been able to, keep involved in nonprofit work. So I'm, for instance, on the board of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund right now, which focuses on sustainable development and peace building and a democratic practice, which is actually something that I'm particularly interested in, which is, of course, now become a real hot button topic. But I have been
we need some of those democratic practices in Washington.
Yeah, well, no, and very much in the U.S. and so I've been trying to get more involved and be supportive as I can be with organizations that are both on the ground and working nationally to really make our democracy more representative and therefore our government more responsive. And that's really about finding ways and making sure that it is just as easy as possible for people to vote and vote securely. Mm-hmm. And so that is, I mean, it's been really unfortunate that it's become partisan suddenly. It really shouldn't be. Yeah. But it is also, I think it's encouraging though, that it is very much in the news now, and people recognize that, hey, our democracy is maybe more fragile than we realized. And so we need to fight for this.
Well, I was just reading a little bit about you ahead of time, impressed by the nonprofit credentials. And the reason I ask here is, I think of like being born at Kennedy, probably comes with such expectations of public service, of doing something big beyond yourself. Did the Rockefeller name carry that, or as well? I mean, was there that kind of expectation, or these choices you made freely and on your own?
Well, they were. I mean, I would say I'd be lying if I told you that I didn't feel any pressure. But I would say that it was never explicit, and it was probably more self-applied than, it goes back to the early 20s, wanting to do something that's going to make a difference. And but I think then figuring out, as you get a little older, like, okay, like, but in order to do that, you gotta figure out what you're good at and what your niche is. And I think I think I'm very lucky to have to be born when I was born. I think being able to pursue film, and my parents were just, and I can't thank them enough for this, just always from the beginning, when I was 11 years old and I started expressing an interest in it, like, that my dad lent me his high-8 camcorder to shoot films with friends on the weekend, movies with friends on the weekends, and it encouraged that from the beginning,
That's
and
great.
I think had I been born a generation or two before, like that would not have been an acceptable career path. And so I'm very fortunate to be born in the time and place that I was.
It was really a delight to have you on the show and to get to know you and your work a little bit. And we're really looking forward to seeing what comes next. So to our audience, please encourage you to watch Settlers and be on the lookout for the next films coming from Wyatt Rockefeller.
And that's streaming on Amazon Prime, I believe.
It's on most of the digital platforms and in theaters still in the US, and will be coming out in other territories elsewhere starting Friday.
Great. Go see it.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Thank you, guys. This has been fun, really fun.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on the Filmosophers Movie Talk Show. Please subscribe to stay up to date on our newest episodes.